podcast.
Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Joel with my dad here, Rick Malm.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, so today we were going to talk about feeling unqualified. And I was thinking about the first time I started leading outdoor adventures around the world. And I led a couple trips, and I remember getting, on regular occasions, emails from people saying, hey, who are you qualified to lead your outdoor expeditions through? And, who are you certified with? Are you wilderness certified? And I remember feeling really insecure about it and writing back and be like, well, I'm not qualified and blah, 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 blah. And then I remember when I started doing coaching, the same thing happened. People would write me and be like, who are you certified to life coach through? I'm like, well, I have a master's degree in counseling, but I'm not certified. And these people would say, well, I have four life coaching certifications. And I'd be like, well, that's great. Are you coaching anyone? Well, no, I haven't been able to get any clients yet. And so it got me thinking along the grain of this. Who told me that I had the right to do all of these things that I was unqualified to do? And I started realizing it was my dad, because well, I hate to say it, but you're pretty unqualified. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, that's probably the first step to being qualified, recognizing you're unqualified.
Well, I think that's one of the things you ingrained in us earlier on, is you don't have to wait for somebody to kind of put their blessing on you. If you feel God's calling you to do, that's blessing enough. And I think a lot of us are waiting for people to approve.
Yeah.
Or is it approval? What is that? What's that come from?
Well, the first time I think I noticed something like that, I was principal of a Christian school, and this Christian school is not accredited. And then I began to find out what accreditation was. And then the Association of Christian Schools came up with this accreditation program. And it just had their little requirements. And if they have this many books in your library, and if you have this many certified teachers, blah, blah, blah. I thought, well, wait a minute. I could start my own accreditation organization and call it the Malm World Accreditation Organization. And people could say, hey, you're accredited through what? The MAW. I'm an MAW accredited school. I thought, most of this is a bunch of bunk, man. It's just... who qualifies anybody?
Yeah.
I mean, who qualifies through all my years of college? And I've almost got a doctorate, all my years of college, all I did was read a bunch of books. And who qualified them to be the teacher to decide which books they're going to give me?
People who were told what hoops to jump through by the first guy who told them what hoops to jump.
Yeah, so somebody decides, okay, if you'll read this many books and pass this many tests, well, who makes up the test? Who decides what needs to get known? And again, it kind of goes back to my school years. When I started the school, I had this idea that, boy, every second grader's supposed to know this, and by the end of third grade, you'll know this. When I got into it, it's all a mess. It's all determined by the local school board, by the teacher, really. She decides. Third grade, I had this teacher who just loved pioneers. All year long, everything we did was study pioneers. I can tell you more about pioneers and pioneer songs and pioneer stories. She loved pioneers. Yeah, we got math in there and things too, but the point I realized is there is no this great overarching power up there that determines what a person should know to be educated or to be qualified. And so you can make up your own little qualifications. Okay, I've led 10 trips. I'm going to start my own accrediting organization, and I'm going to accredit myself to be a counselor.
Southwest Airlines did that a few years back. They made up their own award. They're like, we're
hilarious.
The best at this, this, and this. We're going to win the award.
The Triple Crown Award. I remember that, and they won every year. I thought it was hilarious. I thought these guys are geniuses.
That's the entrepreneur spirit. So I think that's interesting that a lot of times we're waiting on someone to tell us, you're qualified to do this, but you're basically the idea is, it sounds kind of like multi-level marketing. It's the first guy in gets to set the rules, and then everybody that comes under them, like, here's the hoops you got to jump through.
Yeah.
And then you'll get my approval.
And you know what's crazy? It never gets easier to join an organization, because once I've got mine, I'm going to make it harder on the next guy. That's what right. I've seen,
Every industry gets very protective about their...
Exactly. I was a member of this denomination. I remember I rejoined them over a period of 10 or 12 years because we'd leave the country and different things had happened. And every time it got harder. And I talked to one of the old boys, and he said, man, when I felt called to preach, I just went and asked the president. I said, I feel called to preach. He put his hands on me and says, God bless this man. You're ordained with our organization. Go for it. That was all there was to it. And now, man, there's tests and schooling and all this kind of stuff that you got to go through to be qualified.
Yeah. Well, okay, so talk about... so I think one of the interesting things, a few years ago, you started the mission. And I remember, I kind of grew up with the idea that, well, anybody can be a missionary, because I remember you said that one time, one of the greatest, or what was it? Somebody said
Oh, some guy said that he realized he had had a great admiration for missionaries because he had met Jim Elliot when he was a boy, and he said, I realized after meeting me, he said, gosh, if Brother Malm can be a missionary, anybody can be a missionary. He's my friend, so I took that as a compliment, which I really think it was. It's like, gosh, this is something that, you don't just decide you want to do it, but if God's calling you to do it, there's going to be an empowerment and an enablement that comes along that's going to allow you to do it.
Yeah. So you went on the mission field, and then you ended up starting your own organization, which somebody would say, well, who are you certified through to start an organization?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is, so I grew up around that. And I remember a few years ago, some missionary, I read their blog, and I went to the organization they're part of. And the start of the intro to the website said something like this. It's like there's very few people that are qualified to do what a missionary does. And I was like, wow, I bet they don't have a lot of that. If that's their recruiting pitch, I'm guessing a lot of people aren't joining them because people most of the time already feel unqualified. It's that in psychology they call it the imposter syndrome, where everybody already feels like they're a fraud anyways.
Right.
So if you're telling them, well, you don't even have what it takes, you'd think it's reverse psychology. I guess the Marines kind of use that, only the few and the proud. But when it comes to missions, how many people feel qualified to go into missions? And so you kind of turned that on its head and you said, well, we'll build an organization based on making it easy for people who have a call to get into the field.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I saw that same website, and it was like few people have and I think what they were trying to do was motivate people to come to their training so that you would go out and feel qualified.
Right.
But my guess is they discouraged more people than they encouraged, because again, as you said, most of us pretty well feel unqualified, and actually, I think that's a very good characteristic, because the people who feel like, well, I got it all together. Hey, I'm God's answer to the world. If all the world's problems would be solved if people would just listen to me. I've known people like that.
Yeah.
And typically, when I run across somebody like that, I go, well, they're just. It's just a matter of time till God has to break that within them, because God's not going to use somebody like that. And that's kind of what you see with Saul. When Saul, the king, started out, he was a very humble man. I didn't want the position. He went and hid. He knew he was going to be chosen. But then the next thing is, he's like, I've got to take care of this. The people are leaving me. I'm losing control here, and I've got to keep control of things. And I don't know what made that shift in power, but he was very qualified when he was unqualified. And so when he became qualified, then God went out and said, well, let me just go find this little shepherd boy who will go up against a giant, not with my sling, but in the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's what he said. I come against Goliath in the name of the Lord, not in my own power, not because I killed a bear, I killed a lion. I know I can kill you too. It's in the name of the Lord. And so God's looking for people that he can use.
Now that's an interesting thing, because that's along the same lines. He does use people who he has qualified, but they may not realize they've been qualified, because everything he's been doing in your life has been preparation for it. So you see, like, the heroic journey, the classic Joseph Campbell's What Makes a Heroic Journey is there's some dude living his normal life. He gets thrown into chaos. He's forced to make a decision. He usually runs from the call, and then he ends up facing challenge after challenge, kind of the classic Frodo Baggins, like, here's the ring, you need to destroy this thing. And he goes and challenge after challenge after challenge after challenge, and then he becomes victorious through it. But Frodo the whole time is feeling like, I don't have what it takes.
Yeah.
But yet it's pretty clear he has what it takes because of his heart.
Yeah. Well, and I've just seen that in life too. And so when there have been so many like challenges that come around. I remember one time when we had just been really stabbed in the back, and I was just kind of asking the Lord, I said, God, this has happened so many times. Obviously, somehow you're in this thing, because it happens to your people all the time. And so what is this all about? Why? I mean, obviously you're aware of it. And I really felt like the Lord told me, and I don't know how this settles out theologically, but I felt like the Lord just put into my heart that I not only allow that to happen, but I'm behind it orchestrating it, because in my case there, I needed to test your heart. And it's kind of the Abraham-Isaac thing. Will he offer Isaac? I needed to see if I could promote you to a next level. Because if this thing wiped you out, then I can't really trust you with anything bigger, because the bigger the responsibility, the bigger the attacks, the bigger the obstacles. And so what I've seen is when you overcome all those little obstacles, I hate to tell people this, but I say, man, you did great on that, but guess what that means? The next one's going to be bigger.
Yeah.
And bigger and bigger and bigger. And you keep getting these bigger and bigger obstacles, But the encouraging part is the reason you can handle that bigger one is because you passed this smaller one.
Mm.
And then you get to the bigger one and you go, oh man, because I know like some of the things that have come against us, if they had hit us when we were young believers, I think it might have wiped us out. And so God like takes you step by step by step. And it's like in the kingdom, the reward for good work is more work. And in the same way, when you pass one of those tests of
Yeah.
going through the tribulation, going through the attacks, going through the fire, which is usually imposed, at least in my case, by other Christians, you know, the world doesn't give me much problems. It's other believers and then my own heart that my biggest enemies.
Yeah, the enemy is within.
It's me.
The church or us. Yeah.
I think the devil could die yesterday and I wouldn't know it for months because I'm still battling with my old flesh and with enough Christians that are mean and nasty. So
Which that's an interesting thing because I've met a lot of disillusioned people who, when you look at their life, you can kind of trace it back. You know, in counseling, I work with a lot of people in counseling and coaching, and you trace it back, and somewhere along the way, God put something in their heart to do, and somebody got in the way and said, no, you're not qualified, or no, you're not called to that place. Like, I talked to a lot of people that had a heart for missions, and some mission board somewhere said, we don't think you're a good fit. And I think, oh my gosh, what they missed out on, but they believed those people. And so there's the question of like, do you submit to authority or you do find another door, and are they really your authority? And what do you think on that?
Well, I mean, rebellions is a sin of witchcraft. You know, I'm very much opposed to rebellion, but I think we oftentimes misqualify, miscalculate, mislabel just disagreement as rebellion. And so and unfortunately, many people, you have to look at it like too. A lot of mission boards are kind of looking out for themselves. It's not to say anything bad about a missions board, but okay, think about it. Okay, so I'm on this missions board. If I approve you and you got like a 50-50 chance of making it, I'm risking the good name of our mission. I'm risking resources we might invest in you. I'm risking all this, and you may get out there and make us look bad.
Right.
And so therefore, unless I'm pretty sure you're going to make it, I can't afford to take that risk. Because then it makes me look bad to other people.
Yeah.
Oh, you're the guy who approved him? Well, duh, didn't you? He only had a 50-50 chance of making it. Well, and I think you just can't figure those things because it's like in an algebraic equation, when you put an X in there, you have no idea what the answer is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And God's like this big X. 5 times X equals what? Well, it depends on what X is. It depends on what God wants to do.
Yeah.
5 times God is who knows.
That for some reason that makes me think of this big debacle that happened a few months ago with this missionary John Chow.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, "Oh, what a fool! He died in vain." And I'm thinking,
I'm getting on my soapbox now.
I'm like, you don't understand how the world works because I guarantee you, thousands of people that had never heard that there were still unreached people all of a sudden got a fire lit in their heart.
Yeah.
And again, the blood of the martyrs, seed of the church is always kind of whoever said that. Tertullian.
Yeah.
The blood of the martyrs, seed of the church, and so you're looking at it from this perspective of that guy wasn't trained, he had no clue what he was doing, he endangered the locals.
Which actually he was when you go back and check into
right.
I know,
well,
I heard all that too.
It's like tit for tat. Like you could go back and forth. Well, he was this. Well, he was that. The bottom line is, it's the first guy through the wall gets the bloodiest, and it's usually the guy who's dumb enough to think he can do it.
Yeah.
And then everybody goes, "Hey, he got through the wall. Man, he looks like a mess, or maybe he didn't even survive. Yeah. But the wall, we can get through the wall now." And so, it's interesting how God chooses to use unqualified people who are like, "Well, I'm unqualified anyway, so what the
What have
heck?
I got to lose?
Yeah, why not? Let's just go for what the heck?
Yeah.
Let's go for it."
I read a little quote. It said, it's by this Christian comedian. It says, 1/2 hour before the flight, still a fool was Orville Wright. He was an idiot until it worked. And I just say, when those people killed John Chow, they doomed themselves to hear the gospel. Because, I don't know, we haven't heard of it yet, and maybe we won't hear of it, but you know there are people who are preparing to go in and take the gospel of those people.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I can think of all these young people that probably got mobilized just because of the knowledge of it. Yeah. And then the funny thing about it is the huge, huge media stir it created. It's like he could not have been more effective, that unqualified son of a gun. Like, it was like, boom. Because they say that, no publicity is bad publicity, or all publicity is good publicity, whatever the verse of that is. So, everybody's out there criticizing him, and but how many people were motivated by it? And again, it's like the professionals. Yeah. There's this guy named Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and he says this. He says that the challenge with experts in most fields is that they can be an expert and be completely wrong and never get called on it.
Exactly. Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
pilots, they're forced to they have skin in the game, because if they're wrong, they're going down with the ship. But
Yeah.
most people are like, well, it's an opinion. You know, the people sitting in their ivory tower saying, well, this unqualified missionary on here, I have a PhD in missiology, and I've been at this I've been educating people for 40 years. Have you ever done anything? I mean, again,
it was Moody or Spurgeon, I can't remember which. I always get those two guys confused, which is funny because they're different. They're totally different. But anyway, one of them, somebody came up to him, I think it was Moody, said, "Mr. Moody, I do not like the way that you are so aggressive in evangelism. I do not like the way you evangelize." And Mr. Moody said, "Well, how do you evangelize?" "Oh, well, I don't." And he responded back to him, "Well, I think I'll keep doing it the way I do it rather than not doing it the way you don't do it."
that's right.
You know?
That's what it comes
He's
down.
doing something,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing with it's funny with the coaching thing. I still get that nowadays. Even though I've got some books out and stuff, people are like, "Who qualify?" It's funny, once you get a book, people the qualification thing drops off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I still get people like, "Well, who are you certified to coach through?" And I always ask them, like, "How many people are you coaching?" "Well, I haven't actually gotten anybody yet, but I've got 4 certifications that I'm like, I got people banging down my door to meet with me." And a lot of it's because, I went and got some education. Look, you always talk about education being
Right.
You talk about education.
Sharpen the axe. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed in the church there are a lot of streams, but there are two kind of major streams when it comes to education. There's the stream that value it above all things,
Mm-hmm.
and you just got to have the PhDs and the degrees and all that stuff, And then there's the other stream, which I kind of grew up in, where you almost value ignorance.
Yeah. There are a lot of people that value ignorance. I was at a conference recently, and the guy's like, I have never read a book in my life. And I'm like, what are you doing standing up there bragging about that?
Please don't admit it.
Yes.
Yeah, but in those two streams, and you look at it, and so they both have scriptures to back it up. And of course, from the ignorant stream, it's, well, Peter was an ignorant, unlearned fisherman, but they saw that he had been with Jesus. You just need to be with Jesus, But Peter said, add to your faith knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, add your faith knowledge. And then he went on to other things to add. But number 2 thing was, once you get your faith, begin to learn. Begin to study, begin to show yourself approved, And of course, on the other side of it is those people who are, the value of the knowledge. Paul was from the highest school available, the school of Gamaliel, and he had to reduce himself to, I determined to know nothing but Christ and him crucified. I could argue all the theology with you. I've spent time walking, we think, personally discipled by Jesus. I could answer all those questions, but I just had to limit it down to Christ and him crucified. And so it's like, education is good because it's like sharpening the axe. In Ecclesiastes, it compares it to sharpening an axe, and it's easier to cut down a tree with a sharp axe.
Yeah.
But if you're proud of your education or you're proud of your ignorance, you got the heart of all sin in your life, pride.
Yeah.
And so you can't count on either. It's got to be the Lord coming through and doing it, because you're not going to argue somebody into the kingdom. It's got to be God touching the heart, and that's something you can't do with wisdom, nor can you do with ignorance. It's got to be God touching their heart. And that can happen through any yielded vessel that God wants to use, including a donkey.
Yeah, he can use anything. Well, and so you always, one of the things you always said too was education is it's funny because you have
like
a
a
master's
key.
in education, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're like pretty educated, but you never pushed it hard on us. But you always said that you're like, education's a key, and you don't know what doors you're not getting into because you don't have the key.
Right.
So anybody that's like, well, you don't need education. Well, you don't know what doors you're not getting into, because people are just like, but I've seen that with me. I don't go flaunting in my master's degree, but it's funny when people all of a sudden see that I have a master's degree. Some people are like, oh. And it's like, who cares? I mean, once you have the paper, you're kind of like that. Who cares?
Yeah.
Hopefully, I'm not. That's the way I am. But so it is a key that gets you in the door, but it's just an interesting thing to think about how the both of them are pride. I mean, there's the two extremes of pride. But also it's fascinating too. Paul was totally qualified. Basically said, now I'm unqualified.
Yeah.
But then God used him to write a chunk of the New Testament. And it's interesting, most of the guys that wrote, it was about 2/3 of the New Testament was written by highly educated guys. Luke
wrote
was a
most
doctor
of the New Testament. He wrote more than Paul, actually, as far as volume goes. And he's a doctor. And Paul, educated guys. So, yes, God uses ignorant guys, and he uses ignorant, unlearned fishermen who have been with Jesus. Mm-hmm. That's the first qualification. But he can do greater things even with... So, again, once you become educated, Peter added to his faith knowledge. And so it's not like, they're just not a qualification. It's like almost apples and oranges, you know. It's like it really doesn't, you're not comparing to the framework is, you know, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, nor the strong man in his strength. Let him, he who boasts, boast in this, that I know that he knows the Lord, Isaiah. And so it's not in the wisdom, it's not in the education. That can help, and I think we need to constantly be trying to improve, to study, to show ourselves approved unto God, a workman. But if we think that somehow that's going to make us more qualified, then we're just shooting up the wrong tree.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not going to, it'll give you more information, but God's got to open the doors of opportunity. You know, Paul said there is a wide door of opportunity for me. You know, he also said there's persecution coming with that, but that's part of the package. But God's got to open those doors.
It almost kind of is like putting the cart before the horse sometimes, where the people that get the education thinking the doors are going to open for them, then they get a little arrogant and cocky, and then they get resentful when they don't get that. But I meet a lot of people who the door opens for them, and then they get the education. But I guess that's a way of keeping yourself humble. So really, I mean, if you really look at the unqualified element of it, would be, are you going to be able to stay humble? Because as soon as you get a little arrogant, what is it? Much knowledge puffeth up, or something in that. Or King James says.
3 times in Scripture it says God resists the proud. Twice in the New Testament. And they're basically paraphrasing, I think it's Psalm or Proverb, where it says basically the same thing. And what it literally means is like God pushes away. It's like like a football player straight arming, pushing away somebody who's trying to tackle him. God pushes away the proud. Well, I sure don't need God pushing me away. You know, what help do I have if God himself is resisting me in my efforts? So humility is humility is the key to it all. If you're proud of anything, then you know God is ultimate. If you're proud of anything, God is almost required. I would say is required to remove that, to shatter that, to break that. And that's where Paul said, "I don't want you to be ignorant about what happened to us in Asia. We were at the end of our rope." He said, the mark of death was upon us. We didn't think we were going to make it, but he said, why did that happen? So that we would learn not to depend upon ourselves. And perhaps that's where Paul got that trust in his wisdom, trust in his experience, trust in his knowledge shattered. Somewhere it happened. Because then, and Mars Hill, total failure as far as he was concerned. So when he goes to Corinth right after Mars Hill, he says, I've decided, look, I argued with the best of them and put them down.
Well, and he was super smooth on Mars Hill. If you read his little articulation of it,
oh yeah,
it's like, wow, that was very powerful. We look at it and we're like, wow, that was amazing.
He was addressing their issues, and he knew right where they were coming from. But he realized, a few listened, and a few heard, but most of them just said, "Oh, we'd like to hear more about this." Yeah. You can go on and on with that nonsense debate, you know. And he realized this isn't it. This isn't where it is. The power is in Christ and Him crucified. So at the next stop, he said, "When I went to Corinth, I determined to know among you nothing but Christ and Him crucified." Just the basics, the bottom line.
So somebody's out there listening saying, man, I've felt unqualified my whole life. I look at somebody like you, Rick, and I say, wow, there's no way I could ever start a mission. Or Joel, I look at, I've got a little bit, I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of giants with you and Mom and what you guys did. But what advice would you give to somebody that says, I don't feel qualified, but I feel called to do, I feel deep in my heart I'm supposed to do this thing.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say is read my book.
There you go.
I seriously would.
Commissioned every nation.
I put all the thoughts and the things I've learned along the way into that. And I realized just recently, it's kind of like a bird's nest. If you get a bird's nest, it's comprised of all different little pieces of twigs and feathers and hair and fur and whatever the bird found along the way. And all those little pieces make up the nest. And it's like all these are little pieces that I picked up along the way where I saw something, I learned something here, I learned something from being a part of this mission, I learned something pastoring there or on this leadership position or in this followership position. Yeah. And all those kind of came together to make this. The key to it, though, so it's all kind of summarized in there, but really what the message of the book is this. It's that old song, to be happy in Jesus, trust and obey. You just have to kind of trust God and then obey what you hear in your heart. And you may not be sure, you may not be 100% positive, but you just take the step. It's like Peter stepping out of the boat. You don't know if the water's going to get hard when you step on it. You don't know if you're going to sink and drown, but he was obedient. The Lord said, come, he came, and he was obedient. And then God did the rest.
Yeah. That's so basically you're saying
obedience.
Obedience. And I would add to that a couple other things. One is, if you do feel unqualified, seek people who you feel are qualified and get their advice. Now, that comes with a warning caveat, because I've had some of the most qualified people say that's not doable. But it is wise to know what you're getting into. So, seek some advisors. Anytime I've ever started a thing, I've called and I've sought counsel, and you have to do that. I mean, otherwise you're being, it's a different kind of arrogance where, like, well, I don't need to ask anybody's advice. I've got God's advice. Yeah, but you still gotta, like, you guys still gotta figure out what you're getting into, and to avoid some
Yeah.
pain.
But I think a caveat on that, because I know the advisors, you seek people who care about you, who know you. Not like, okay, I'm going to lead an adventure group, so I need to contact the guy who's the head of an adventure group over here and get his advice and counsel, because he may discourage you.
That's true. And when I've done that, I've gotten very bad advice, because I try to do what they're doing,
Yeah.
and it doesn't work for me.
So it's not really advice as far as the technicals of it.
Yeah,
That you need to hear from the Lord. It's more advice as far as people who know you and care about you, who are going to walk with you through it, in case, when you hit those hard times. I say in case you hit hard times, because you will hit hard times.
Yeah.
There will be struggles. If it were easy, it would have already been done.
Well, and the willingness to seek counsel, once again, comes back to that humility thing.
Yeah.
It's like, or even read books. That's the thing about books that's funny, is like, you don't think God would speak through other people. Like, that's what a book is.
Yeah.
It's ideally, is God having spoke through the wisdom through other people.
How much people would pay if I could just sit down with C.S. Lewis,
Yeah.
or whoever your hero is. You can.
Fortunately, he took the time to write out his stuff. Yeah.
And it's his best stuff. It's stuff he's really thought through. It wouldn't just be whatever comes off the top of his head. So books are such treasures in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. So I think the essence of what, if you're out there and you're feeling, hey, I feel like I'm supposed to do this thing, but I'm totally unqualified. First, I would say this: if you're feeling the call and it seems affirmed by those around you who love you and know you, then you probably are more qualified than you realize, because God doesn't waste anything. Everything that's happened to you up to this point has been preparation for what he's called you to do. When I have people come to me and they're like, I want to become an organic okra farmer. And I'm like, well, do you have any experience with that? No, I'm a CPA, but I just feel called to organic okra farming. I'm like, I just don't know that God calls you to do anything just completely out of the blue that there's been no preparation for.
Yeah.
Now, if you
Start preparing.
Yeah, now
Start
if you
doing
grew
it.
up on a farm, maybe that's what I taught a lot of people, like, oh, okay, you do have a history with that,
Yeah.
Or I feel called to fly jets or whatever. Well, do you have any history? Oh, yeah, I also have a pilot's license. Oh, okay. So you're not stepping out of your role as a pastor to go fly planes. So he doesn't ask you to do stuff that you may feel unqualified, but he never wastes anything. Yeah. So all of the experiences you've had, like you said, in this mission, leading this church as a pastor, one of the focuses of C10 is pastoral care. And so you, in your role as serving as a pastor, implemented that in the vision for the mission. So it's just a natural part of who you already were. So you were qualified.
Yeah.
But again, you have to get over that hump of,
well, the other thing is, if you are measuring your qualifications by the way everybody else is doing it. For example, with me, I frankly, I'm not really that into missions. Which is weird, because I'm directing a large mission agency, or 2 mission agencies actually growing. But I'm into seeing people step into the things God has for them and watch God do amazing things. And missions just happens to be a tool for doing that. So if I had sat down and calculated start a mission agency, I'd go, well, I don't speak that language. And I'm not even interested in speaking the third world. What's the third wave of incarnational? How do we, reach the world through? I just go do something. Just go love people and just, and see what happens. I'm just not into all that mission stuff. And so if I had thought about starting a mission agency, and I've got to fit into this pattern or fit into that, be conformed to this mold over here, I'm still unqualified.
Yeah.
But God had something unique to do that used the qualifications he had put into me to create something rather unique. And the same way, with you and what you're doing there, if you had patterned it after something else, it wouldn't have been who God had made you to be.
Which I tried, and it frustrated me.
Yeah, trying to do
trying to do what everybody else did.
I want to reiterate, though, what you said. Yeah, in finding direction, you do need to seek counsel. Everybody says, well, I prayed about it. Well, prayer is one of the worst ways you can find direction. Yeah. You need to, yes, pray, but then get that confirmed with people who care about you, with authorities that God has put into your life, people who care about you. And of course, it needs to line up with the Word too, but authorities that care about you. So it needs to be godly authorities, godly people who care about you.
It's good.
And then look for the confirmation through coincidences and circumstances. And I say coincidences, but circumstances and God bringing the pieces all together. He will confirm that. In a mouth of two or three, let every word be established.
Yeah, and then success silences the critics. So you'll have critics all the way up until the moment, like Orville Wright, 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Until he took flight, everybody's like, the dude's insane.
Yeah.
And then when it succeeds, the cool thing about it, when it succeeds and you feel unqualified, is immediately you know, hey, this was God that did this.
Yeah.
And when people say that, you really, and you know when people are faking that one, like, it's all God. You're like, no,
Yeah.
you're pretty confident in yourself, buddy.
Yeah.
But it's, you've heard those people like, no, literally, it's all
It is
God.
all God.
Yeah, because
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the beautiful thing about that. So, hey,
Yeah.
great talk, Dad.
Good. Enjoyed it.
If you liked what you heard, please consider sharing this with a friend. For more information, visit joelmalm.com or rickmalm.com. Thanks for listening.